He's been a part of the problem. He's why we're in the mess that we're in. So we've got to have it. I'll talk about my record, and I think it's high time that Charlie Dent talk about his record and defend his record. Because I hear him talk about Washington as if he hasn't been there for the last 6 years. So I think it's fair to make those comparisons, and I think ultimately November 2nd, people will have the opportunity to make their choice.
Mr. Dent?
Sure. Well, when it comes to accountability, John Callahan takes no accountability for anything that goes on in Bethlehem. An $8.5 million deficit, an administration that doesn't pay its bills, budgets that are patchworks of one-time revenues that pay for recurring expenditures, money's moved illegally. These are the findings of their independent auditors, and he won't even admit it. You know, the big refrain in Bethlehem is, where's the mayor? He's AWOL. He's simply not doing his job. So when he talks about accountability, look in the mirror. He really should. Again, look, an election is a choice among candidates. He's made a lot of claims that have really gone unchallenged. He says he's created 5,000 jobs. He didn't create 5,000 jobs. It's laughable if you would say these things. So, but we have to talk about accountability, and I'm happy to stand on my record. He is the candidate of the Washington agenda. Hey, Joe Biden is coming here because he wants John Callahan to endorse and rubber stamp his agenda. He's not coming here so that he wants you to go to Congress to vote against him. You supported him on stimulus. You're the candidate of the Washington agenda that has been so widely repudiated by so many people, whether it was on the failed stimulus, the health care law. Now you're saying you're against cap and trade when you were for it. So, let's be honest about this, John. You're the candidate of the Washington agenda. I've been fighting against it.
Mr. Towne?
Sure. In the United States, what we have is a two-headed one-party system, and both the Republicans and the Democrats have really failed the American people. What I believe, and I think the reason why you see so much negative campaigning is because they don't really have any new and original ideas. They're just recycling the same old failed policies over the last couple decades and throwing them out as something new. For instance, Mr. Callahan's jobs plan is just recycling the same points that Mr. Dent made in his 2008 election campaign. And I think that it's time for new ideas. One of the ideas that I have to deliver accountability and transparency is called our open office. And the way our open office will work is anytime any resident in the area would like to comment on any House floor bill, they can do so either by phone, by mail, or online. I'll read through it. It'll be open and transparent to the public. And then what I'll do afterwards, I'll tell you not just why I voted on, not just how I voted on every single bill, but also why I voted. So that way you always have a record, and if you ever disagree, you'll be able to go back and say, Jake, I disagree with you on this. And this is something you have not seen from Mr. Dent in his 20-year political career, and you're not going to see it from Mr. Callahan as well. Thank you.
Mr. Owens, a question for Mr. Dent.
Mr. Dent, economists have said the U.S. officially entered a recession in December 2007 during the Bush administration. Why should anyone believe Republicans have a plan for making the economy better?
Well, I think you've seen what's happened with the plan that's been presented to us so far, failed stimulus. Well, first, I'll talk about jobs. I think what things we've got to do, we have to have faith in the private sector to create jobs. John really supports more of a status approach. If the government simply spends more money, gets more involved in more aspects of our lives, that will grow the economy. I disagree. I believe what we need to do is give small businesses a 20% deduction on income, which was suggested at the time of the stimulus but rejected, because those small businesses will create jobs at a much lower cost, and they'll create them more efficient, and they will be more sustainable. That's one thing. In fact, I was just at Air Products today and met with a few hundred of the workers out there. In fact, point one of John Callahan's plan to close loopholes will actually cost Air Products tens of millions of dollars. It's a massive tax increase on American business, particularly American manufacturers who export. It will kill jobs here and send American headquartered companies to relocate to countries like Ireland. It is a huge and alarming fiasco in the centerpiece of his plan. Also, we need to extend the R&D tax credit, make sure that we extend these current tax rates for all taxpayers, give predictability and stability to those who want to invest.
Mr. Towne.
Sure. Governments do not create sustainable jobs, only people do. And what we need to take a harsh look at is all the tax, labor, and regulatory laws that the government has put in place, and just ask ourselves one very simple question: does this encourage or discourage employment? And if it discourages employment, you need to consider amending it or getting rid of it. Locally, we've seen here the unemployment rise from 5 to 10%. The true national debt of our country, when Mr. Dent took office, was $7.5 trillion, is now 13.6. We need to have we need to take an axe to the federal budget and really reduce the spending that's going on. And we also need to realize that the unfunded liabilities for the Social Security and the Medicare programs per the United States Treasury is $107 trillion. When you add up the true national debt, it comes out to be about $400,000 for every man, woman, and child. And what it's adding up to is this huge bubble in the dollar and the treasury market. And when people, eventually go to the bank and try to get money, we're going to be hit with a lot of problems. And one of the things I favor is a temporary income tax holiday to let people keep what they earn, and to take. Thank you.
Joe, I'll answer your question. We have no reason to believe that sending Charlie Dent back to Washington will result in anything more than more lost jobs. Charlie Dent's record on jobs is clear. He supported the failed economic policies that led to the recession in the first place. That recession, the Wall Street meltdown, he was there for the deregulation of Wall Street, he was there for the bailout of Wall Street, and he stopped accountability of Wall Street every step of the way. This recession has resulted in the loss of over 8 million jobs in this country, 18,000 jobs right here in the Lehigh Valley alone. So once again, do we want to go back to the failed economic policies that got us here in the first place? That's Charlie Dent's job. Private sector to thrive, for small businesses to thrive and invest, and that has led to more than 5,000 jobs. We did it in Bethlehem. We can do it again in the Lehigh Valley. We can do it again in this country. And I really encourage all of you to visit CallahanJobsPlan.com to get a closer look at the plan.
This is the final question of the first half of our debate. Mr. Flagg, a question for Mr. Towne.
The members of the Westboro Baptist Church have protested in the Lehigh Valley and continue to picket the funerals of soldiers, saying that God is punishing the United States for tolerance of homosexuals. Do these people deserve protection under the First Amendment?
Yeah, under the United States Constitution, people have the right to assembly and the right to free speech. However, as a federal congressman, there is no right to infringe upon that given in the United States Constitution. On the state and local levels, if people want to decide for something in that, for cemetery ceremonies that are private, they could easily decide. But in terms of we might not agree with what everyone says, but what we need to do is defend the right of people to say it if we are to live in a free and open society. What we have all too often from career politicians in D.C. is a policy where they just do not suffer dissent. And, it might hurt us sometimes to hear these types of dissent, but that's what we need to fight for if we are to have a free and open society. Thank you.
Mr. Callahan.
I think we do have to protect one's right for freedom of speech. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to discrimination, I've put forth legislation just in the last couple of months to form a Human Relations Commission within the city of Bethlehem to prevent discrimination within the city, based on folks' ethnicity, based on their age, based on their disability, and yes, including based on their sexual preference. And so my record's clear on this issue, and is a different record than Congressman Dent.
Mr. Dent.
Yeah, the question, John, was about those people in Kansas who come and so offensively picket funerals of soldiers who've been killed. I went to the 5th anniversary of the 9/11 celebration out in Shanksville. I went out with the Sugars, Bill and El Sugar. Their son Bill was killed in New York. And I remember those signs. So offensive. I just couldn't imagine. I had to ask Mrs. Sugar, please, look away. Don't look at these horrible signs. Yes, those individuals have First Amendment rights, those people from Kansas, from that church. But you know what? What they're doing is harassment. It is harassment. It is wrong. When people go to a funeral and picket and say just the most outrageous things, and it's so offensive and harmful. I've been to the services of several of our soldiers who've given that last full measure of devotion, as I said earlier. And I'm very proud that so many of our veterans groups and with the motorcyclists, they go out there and they basically ring the funerals to make sure that the families can grieve, in a very appropriate and thoughtful way, and not to be harassed by these radicals. When does the First Amendment end, and when does harassment? When does it become harassment? I think what we're witnessing is harassment.
Thank you very much. That's the first portion. And now the candidates' questions to each other. And this will be approximately 24 minutes. The rest of the candidate only. And that candidate has 1 minute to respond. Rebuttal time is not allowed in this period. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to make a closing statement at the end of the debate. First, Mr. Towne.
Sure, thank you. I have promised to accept only the district's median household income of $58,000 and donate the remaining $116,000 after taxes to local nonprofit hospitals so it is spent helping those who need it the most. I've also pledged to not enlist in the lucrative congressional pension or health care plans. In this depression created by the reckless spending and money printing by the government, everyone is cutting back, and it only makes sense that public servants should not be making 4 times the nation's median household income. So, Mr. Callahan, after having attacked Mr. Dent for pocketing $37,000 in pay raises over the past 6 years, why will you not pledge to take a pay cut from your $174,000 salary, not take the pension, and pay for your own health care just like everyone else?
Well, Jake, I think I'd agree with you that if you look at the results of Washington over the course of the last 6 years, particularly our congressmen, we're not getting our money's worth right now, that's for sure. Congressman Dent has raised the debt by more than $3 trillion. He's given Wall Street an $850 billion bailout and tax breaks to companies that are outsourcing our jobs. But, to your question, Jake, I would be open to something like that. Let's be clear about, I make $80,000 a year. It's a fine salary, and I'm proud of the salary. But to sit back and listen to Congressman Dent, only in Washington would someone who makes twice what you make criticize you for your salary. He makes $174,000 a year. In the course of the last 6 years, he received over $1 million of taxpayer salary. And he's accepted $37,000 of pay raises while cutting widows and orphans' benefits. So, Jake, I would be open. I think that I would not accept an increase in pay. I will say this, at least until we return back to the unemployment rates or employment rates before this recession.
Mr. Dent, you may ask a question.
Yeah, my question is to John Callahan. After the health care bill was jammed through the House and the Senate, the House by Speaker Pelosi, you said that you would have voted for the bill and that you support it. Since I'm sure you did not read the bill, because few of the people who voted for it did, John, would you please name 5 of the 20 new or higher taxes in health care law that you support?
Look, Charlie, I'm not going to stand here and play trivia games with you. You were against the bill before the bill was drafted, okay? You were against the bill a year and a half before there was a bill, okay? So I've been supportive of health care. I was outside your office months before the bill was passed in support of health care reform because, again, we all recognized that we had an issue and we had a problem in this country that Charlie Dent said would be issue 1 when he went there and did nothing about it, other than collect $400,000 from the medical insurance companies while your premiums went up, your benefits went down, and their profits increased. So I'm proud of where I stand. I've supported health care reform because I recognize that the current system was unsustainable.
Mr. Callahan, may I ask a question?
My question is for Congressman Dent. Charlie, at the last debate, I asked why you voted against full survivor benefits for widows and orphans of troops that were killed in combat. The issue came up again this evening, and you refused to answer the question. I have the vote here. It's a vote that you made May 11th, 2006, which cost widows on average $60,000 of more than 60,000 widows. You didn't answer the question in that debate. Could you please explain to the widows of our soldiers why you cast that vote? I think that they deserve an answer.
Sure, John, I'd be happy to answer that question. You're trying to find obscure procedural votes.
It's not procedural.
John, this is my time to answer. Let's be very clear about this. I voted the same way that Sam Johnson voted. You know who Sam Johnson is? He's the most heavily decorated member of the U.S. House of Representatives, a 7-year prisoner of war. What you're saying is that Sam Johnson and I have turned our backs on our soldiers, our veterans, and their families. That is what you are saying. And don't interrupt me, because I know you're about to. So I want to be very clear about that. That is the reality, John. And, as I said, I have supported the new GI Bill of Rights for our soldiers who are returning to want to get educational benefits. I want to make sure they can transfer those benefits, too, to their spouses or family members if they can't use that benefit. I mentioned earlier, veterans health funding has nearly doubled since I've been voted for every one of those veterans appropriations bills. I work with local companies on developing remedies for tinnitus or tinnitus, ringing of the ears. We've worked with other companies as well, locally, to try to help our folks. A veterans center in Allentown to help with homeless and substance addicted veterans, trying to help them, doing things. You've never talked about